in modern-day Britain. Some crimes are ignored, and they're ignored in the name of political correctness, in the name of community relations, and using the far right as the bogeyman, the fear of the far right as the bogeyman. We actually fuel more racism.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. On the 20th of November 2003, James Ignatius O'Rourke McMahon was elected councillor for the Failsworth East Ward of Oldham. Deeply ambitious, he ruthlessly rose to power, and by 2011 he was already leader of the council. In 2015, exploiting a Labour Party loophole, he became MP for Oldham West and Royton. If only the people of the town knew then what they now know. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
Good evening, it is the 14th of February, Valentine's Day. My name is Raj Amir. This is the latest of the Recusant 9 transmissions. Gavin Hopley was beaten to death. 5 Asian men were convicted of violent disorder and a 6th man for theft, but no one was convicted of killing him. One of the Asian men was tried for the murder, but he said that he had been at work in an Asian takeaway at the time. Gavin had been out on a night out with 2 friends at the time, but they had got lost in the Glodick area whilst looking for a taxi. They encountered a gang of at least 12 Asian men armed with lumps of wood and heavy clubs who chased them, and they split up. The Asian men that caught Gavin beat him up. One of the others survived because an Asian family had taken him in. He was kicked in the head by a man that used a fence post to support a flying kick at him. Gavin was thrown through the air by the kick and hit his head on the pavement and suffered fatal head injuries. He was also hit with wooden bats. As he lay on the ground, someone then stole his watch and chain. He died 6 days later. No one's been convicted, and as quickly as possible, this became, unfortunately, not an issue about the death, the murder of a young man on the streets of Oldham. It became an issue for the politicians and the police to work out how to manage a potential far-right backlash. So much so that the family didn't even release a photograph of Gavin because they were already aghast at how the far-right had exploited his death. And that is why 19 years later, no one speaks about Gavin anymore in Oldham. There's no calls from politicians to find those who murdered him. No one in the community, no police officers, no memorial in the town, nothing. This boy was murdered in our streets, and as well as the police failing him and his family, in the style of Stephen Lawrence, very much so in the style of Stephen Lawrence, what we saw with Gavin was the town and those that lead it wanted to forget about it as quickly as possible. All in the name of community relations. And we now know, since we've learnt so much about community relations in this town and other towns, Operation Augusta in Manchester, very recently, 96, 97 Asian Pakistani, predominantly Pakistani sex offenders were allowed to continue to roam the streets, picking up children, raping them, trafficking them. And the police officers that tried to intervene were told, go and find some white perpetrators instead. This isn't me race baiting. This is the simple truth. Unfortunately, in modern day Britain, some crimes are ignored, and they're ignored in the name of political correctness, in the name of community relations, and using the far right as the bogeyman, the fear of the far right as the bogeyman, we actually fuel more racism. Yes, Rocky, well done to that Asian family who took him in. An Asian family in Glodick took one of them in, and he survived. So one of his friends survived because of that. And it's just a sad indictment for this town. It was just a year after the riots, and remember the lead up to the riots in this town was the vicious attack on that pensioner Walter Chamberlain. I don't think that man was the same ever again, and why would he be? And just sickening. There's been a sickening series of events in this town for the last 30 years. And of course our politicians, they don't want to talk about it. And as we've discovered on our journey together, the reason they don't want to talk about it, the reason they don't want to deal with it, is because the division of our communities suits the Labour Party that controls this town. The cartel-controlled bloc vote continues to deliver. Asian communities live in fear of the white. White communities look onto the Asians and think they are protected. They receive additional benefits. And so this town continues the way it has. And so it will continue unless we decide enough is enough and say we do not fear being called far-right activists, because we know we're not far-right activists. All we care about is our town healing and our town getting better and moving on. Sean Fielding, Debbie Abrahams, Jim McMahon, all the others, they're not interested in that. They're just interested in keeping things as they are, exploiting the divisions so they can continue to reap the benefits. Dougie, how you doing, mate? No, why would you, Dougie? Why would you see Walter again? Can you imagine? I saw those pictures, Dougie. They were horrific. They were horrific pictures, and those pictures were broadcast all across the world. And the lead up to the riots was, it was just a trigger event, wasn't it? That was just a trigger, and it was one of many triggers, and it reached a tipping point. So the jury cleared the youth of the Hopley murder. So Gavin's the guy who stood trial. But I want you to, because I'm surprised many people don't know about this. So I'll let me read this to you. An Oldham man has been cleared of murdering a teenager after persuading the jury that he was working in an Asian takeaway on the night of the attack. Now remember, how on earth did the CPS take a murder trial to court if the lad's alibi stacked up that he was working at a takeaway on the night of the attack? And it seems this young man's name was Mushin Raza, aged 20, was the last suspect to stand trial over the killing of the 19-year-old Gavin. He was acquitted of murder after claiming he was working at the Royal Balti takeaway in Duckenfield and then went straight home to bed. Security guard Gavin was chased and beaten up by a gang of Asian men after he got lost in a night out in Oldham. Ignore the next paragraph. It's this bit I want to get to. Just move me to the bottom. Police discovered Gavin had been robbed of his watch and chain as he lay dying on the ground. Last May, 5 Asian men aged between 18 and 39, all from Glodick, admitted violent disorder and were given jail terms ranging from 9 to 15 months. Initially, police charged 8 men, including Raza, with murder, but the charges against them were withdrawn before they came to trial. So the police withdrew the charges against the others and kept the charges with him. Raza was later recharged in March 2003 after 2 of the suspects agreed to make statements implicated him. This is where it's, the police had clearly done a deal with 2 of them. One of them was a Mohammed Zubair. who only testified after charges against him for murder, rioting in Oldham, and an unrelated offence of rape was dropped. So that's the deal the police did. I wonder how the victim felt to find out that Mohammed Zabir's rape offence against her had been dropped, so he could give evidence. The second one was Faulmir Mohammed, who was also originally charged with the murder, but was later jailed for 9 months for violent disorder. So clearly another deal had been done there. So these two guys testified against Raza and said, no, he was there. He was the one, I presume, who did the flying kick. And Raza's excuse was, or alibi, was, no. I was working that night in a takeaway. Raza denied murder and in a prepared statement handed to police said he had been working on the night of the attack. At the end of the trial, the jury just took 1 hour to clear Raza. There's no matter the injustices we as victims have had. This is the 19th year anniversary of the murder of this young man. Hours pales into insignificance. But what it demonstrates in this town is this ongoing issue of a failure to act for fear of being branded racist. As soon as this trial collapsed, or he was found not guilty, can you imagine if it had been the other way around? Now, I don't say this to make any of you angry. I just look at the Stephen Lawrence inquiry in comparison. A year later, Gavin's friends put together a fundraise and put a plaque together where he worked. Put a plaque, a memorial stone. The Manchester Evening News described his murder the year earlier as a street incident. I think it was a street incident. They didn't use the word murder. They didn't use the word racist attack. They just couldn't wait to hush it up. Kim, I knew, and I use that term loosely, at least one of these guys. And their eyes were never right. If any of you who've worked with people and known people like that know what I mean. Their eyes were never right. There was something else when you looked at them, and they were looking at you. My understanding is most of them are still in Oldham. And this guy's death is all forgotten about. Murder. Not death, murder. All forgotten about. Debbie Abrahams is the MP for Glodick. Does anyone think she will ever raise this issue? No. She's happy to raise issues about Kashmir. But she won't raise issues about this. And this poor lad's mother, Gavin's mother, heartbroken. She couldn't raise it because she knew the far right had exploited it and would continue to exploit it. Yeah, Gary, you'd know exactly what I mean. Gavin's one, yes. Unfortunately, I need to. If you look at the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, because of the campaigning, they forced the police to reopen the case, and then we found out more had gone on. And eventually, even though his murderers weren't convicted for perhaps what we wanted them, but they were, they were forced back in court. No one will be forced back in court for Gavin's murder. In the name of political correctness, in the name of maintaining community relations, that boy did not get the justice he deserved.
Not fear them. Do not fear any of them.
What I want to do is move on to talk about the disappointing news that many of us found out on Tuesday initially, that the police had decided not to proceed with prosecuting Sean Fielding. All the victims know so far, and I'm yet to receive any correspondence, by the way. I've spoken to the police officer, detective inspector who oversaw the investigation, and I am yet to receive anything from him. I spoke to 2 of the victims today, and they're also yet to receive anything from him as to an explanation what took place. The police contacted the victims by email. The victims first raised this issue in October or so last year, following a series of complaints by Sean Fielding to their employers. And I'll go into the details of all of this in a moment, but let me just set some context. So they received an email on Tuesday. Debbie even received an email addressed to someone else, so that's how much care and attention they paid in the email. So Debbie, there you go. Debbie didn't even get an email in her name. I didn't get an email, so I've got nothing off them apart from something to do. They tagged it onto something else, and we're all waiting for the official reasons. In the meantime, we've seen Sean Fielding clearly give quotes to members of the press, and I'll use that term loosely. First of all to Neil Wilby, and then to Jay Beecher. And what he's clearly stated in there is he's somehow innocent. Now, when the victims received just a notification, just a one-liner that the threshold hadn't been reached, we responded with a series of questions. The questions were not very complicated questions. There were questions like, has Sean Fielding been interviewed? Seeing as though so many of us, went to him, raised this issue. And the police, and remember, this is a police force in special measures. This is a police force that Andy Burnham himself has described as defensive and covering trails and just hiding stuff. The police refused to even answer that question. But Sean being Sean did us all a favour and answered it for us in his gloating statement. The police had not interviewed him, which then I find interesting is the police had not interviewed. If the police had not interviewed Sean Fielding, then when and how did Sean Fielding become aware he had been cleared? All of this stinks. Okay, let's get started. So what we have here is a bloke called Sean Fielding. Now, Sean Fielding exists in 2 capacities. His first capacity is Sean Fielding as an individual, and his second is as the leader of the council. So what Sean Fielding did was not act as an individual, he acted in his capacity as the leader of Oldham Council. And what Sean Fielding did in his capacity as the leader of Oldham Council is make contact with a number of employers where he complained about a series of individuals. And the employers he contacted, so I'll write this down. The employers he contacted was probation, where Mark Wilkinson works. He contacted HMRC, where Moyeb works. He contacted Manchester University, where Jane Barker works, and he also contacted a secondary school where Mark's daughter worked. Now, he contacted these through a combination of email and phone calls. And he contacted them on multiple times. Each of these employers have an email trail or a phone log record of Sean Fielding's engagements with them. And he complained about these individuals. Mark, Moib, Jane, and Sarah. In his complaints, he also made reference to a number of other individuals that he claimed were either convicted criminals, far-right activists, or also in the case of me, he claimed I was being investigated under the Grooming Gang inquiry in Oldham, which is a complete fallacy. But this is Sean Fielding, the barefaced liar. So there was individuals who worked there, and I'll put these down as secondary individuals. Now these included Debbie Cole, who he classed, I think Debbie called you a far-right activist, and I think that's one of the many things he made reference to you. Paul Eric, who's here, he complained about a retired police officer called Pete Jackson, who does a lot of campaigning work with Maggie Oliver. He complained about myself, and he also made reference to a number of others. We also believe he complained to other employers as well and got people sacked. These individuals then contacted the police individually, and the contact with the police started about October time. And they started about October time where Sean Fielding, these people were already being investigated. Mark was already being investigated. Moib was already being investigated. Jane and Sarah were already being investigated. All of the investigations found nothing wrong. Whatever Sean Fielding was complaining about, the substantive elements of them being far-right campaigners, right-wing activists, linked to Tommy Robinson, a whole host of horrific stuff, complete fallacy. When Sean Fielding got nowhere with his first series of emails and phone calls, he repeatedly tried to speak to each of these employers until the employers, in the case of Mark, in the terms of Moab, in the case of James, basically told them to go away. Go away, leader of Oldham Council, go away. And each time he did this, each of the victims have a copy of their complaints and the engagement through freedom of information requests from their own employers and the paperwork of the investigation. Sean Fielding contacted the employers, attempting to have them disciplined, sacked for gross misconduct. In fact, I've attempted to have many of them sacked for gross misconduct in his capacity as leader of Oldham Council. When the victims contacted the police first tried to fob them off. Second, the police agreed to take victim statements. Third, these victims, all of them, had to repeatedly contact the police. To try and have the police come and take their victim statements. It took months in some occasions for these victim statements to be taken. And fourth, once the victim statements were took, for 3 months, the police have been investigating. And that led to Tuesday, I think, the 9th of February, a one-line email from the detective inspector in charge, and I'll give him the courtesy. I won't name him at this point. I'll give him the courtesy of that. The detective inspector got in touch and said, No, it hasn't passed the threshold. What the victims have then done is asked a series of questions and waiting for the answers, but we already know the answers to some of these. And this is where it gets I have no words for it. Was Sean Fielding interviewed? If you report a crime, and here you have 8 respectable people reporting crimes: Mark, retired senior police officer; Moyeb, senior tax inspector; Jane, PhD, paid PhD, works at the University of Manchester; Sarah works in a school; Debbie is a campaigner; Paul Ayrock, businessman, a successful businessman; Pete Jackson, retired police officer with honours; and myself. We're not making this up, and many of us don't know each other, by the way. Many of us have never met each other. I've never met Pete Jackson. The first time I met Jane was in a police station. To this day, I've not met Sarah. So many of us don't know each other. All of us had a paper trail. So it wasn't my word against his word. We had a paper trail of evidence. So the first thing we asked was Sean Fielding interviewed. The second thing was anyone at OMBC interviewed? Remember, he did this in his capacity. That's my spelling for you. He did this in his capacity as leader of the council. The paper trail proves that. So was anyone at OMBC interviewed? Third, were the victims' witnesses interviewed? So, was anyone at probation? Was anyone at HMRC? Was anyone at Manchester University? Was the head teacher at the school? These are the people who Sean Fielding directly engaged in to make his false and malicious and completely fabricated allegations. So was any of these people interviewed? The fourth question is, was the file presented to the CPS? Now, we all know the answers to those. We're all waiting, but we all know what the answers are. This did not take place. None of this here took place. There you go, Kath. It's just me and you on this screen right now, and I'll put in fact, I'm going to do this because I spent a bit of time doing this little graphic for you. So, Kath, many people won't know you. Many people will have never seen your face before. You're the founder of the Failsworth Independent Party, yeah?
I am, yes.
And you're
Mark's...
Mark's...
Proud to say I am.
Yeah, and you're Mark's wife, yeah?
I am, yes. And Sarah's mum.
And Sarah's mother. So you're directly linked to 2 of these victims, yeah? In fact, I'm going to put you on full screen. You don't need to see me. You can be on full screen. There you go. Over to you, Kath. What do you make of this?
Well, you said at the beginning it was disappointing, and it's more than disappointing, to be honest. It's a travesty, and I'm speaking to put the record straight on behalf of the people who at this moment don't want to speak out for various reasons.
Well, there's one main reason, and I'm having a series of disagreements, Kath, elsewhere on the supporters group and elsewhere, with people who want to go to court and do this and do that. We can't yet, Kath. We've not even got the letters yet. We've not even got the letters yet.
It's not going to happen. We're not going to go to court. It's far too expensive. Jane has got absolutely no faith in the justice system. It has really flawed Jane. And I understand that, because you put your trust in the police. If you can't go to the police and expect to be treated correctly, honestly, openly, then where do you go when you've got a problem? There's nowhere else to go. So simply, we won't be going to court. I wouldn't give him, Sean Fielding, the satisfaction of spending my hard-earned cash, because the people of Oldham know him. The people of Oldham know we've done nothing wrong. So, not me, although he has said in the past, but these people have done nothing wrong.
But it's worse than that, isn't it, Kath? Because it's worse than that because people see the hypocrisy. People see the double standards. We've got Debbie over there, Paul Errock and myself. We were hauled into the police station, interviewed under caution when we'd done nothing wrong, made to wait for 6 months or so before the CPS agreed we'd done nothing wrong. And then it transpires that the politicians fabricated, amended, doctored evidence to try and have us charged and failed. And what we've got here, Kat, I mean, look at Debbie. The police turned up to her door because she protested outside Sean Fielding's house. And you've got similar cases, haven't you, Kath? So, I think it's important that we convey to people what has been going on so people can see how challenging it is to avoid saying...
Yeah. You're right. It is challenging. And I've taken it upon myself to write. I wrote to the Chief Constable 4 weeks ago, because 6 weeks ago tonight, a very close family member, and I can't name this person, was out and about and came across Sean Fielding jogging. So this person stopped and spoke to him and asked him why he was doing the things he was doing to our family, why he'd written about Mark and Sarah. And they had I don't really know, I wasn't there. They had a few words with one another. And then Sean went to get his phone out to tape the conversation. So this person removed herself. That was 6 weeks ago tonight. 6 weeks on Wednesday, it will be. A knock at the door at 7:30 at night. 2 Oldham CID officers. First of all, asked for the wrong person because they don't know what the hell they're doing. So they've got the wrong person. But because I can't say names, it's a bit difficult. But long story short, this person had to go to the police station in Oldham and be interviewed under caution with a solicitor present on the Friday.
So this is off the back of an allegation by Sean Fielding. Within days of Sean Fielding making an allegation, an individual received a knock on his door from 2 police officers and found himself interviewed under caution.
Yeah.
There was no witnesses for Sean Fielding, none of that sort of stuff. It was just his word against someone else's word, and this person found himself interviewed under caution in a matter of days. Now, you'll share with me, Kath, won't you? How many times has Mark and Sarah been trying to get their first interview taken? It wasn't just took, was it?
I can't tell you. I have honestly lost track. I cannot tell you. And then they say they'll come, and then they ring and say they're busy, they can't come. And then when they came here on the Monday before Christmas to finally take Mark's statement, which was easy. He'd already emailed it. Because he's a former policeman, he was able to do his own statement. He'd emailed it over, but that wasn't good enough. They came round on the Monday, and then they said they'd be back on the Wednesday. He needed to run it past somebody, have it typed up onto a form, and Mark needed to sign it. Never seen or heard of them since that day. Total mess. Absolutely appalling the way everybody's been treated. And Mark's story is not unique. Sarah didn't even get an email from them last week. Mark was asked to tell Sarah what had happened.
So Sarah is an adult. Yeah, Sarah is an adult. She has the right to be notified by the police what's happened.
Of course.
Not, can you pass on a message to your daughter that we've decided not to take her complaint forward?
Got her email. That again, that's rubbish. She gave her email at least 3 times. They have a phone number. They have an address. Do not ask, on something as serious as this, you do not ask other people to pass on a message. Oh, sorry, Sarah, they're not taking any further action. Sean Fielding's done absolutely nothing wrong. Well, what a surprise. What a surprise. Not
The
at all.
police,
Not
the
at
police
all.
said the threshold for prosecution had not been reached. And
Indeed.
what I've shared with you is a little piece of paper where I mapped everything out. Of course, the threshold hasn't been reached when Sean Fielding wasn't interviewed. No one at OMBC was interviewed. Not a single one of the victims' witnesses, so none of the employers were interviewed, and no file was presented to the CPS.
Yeah, that's it. How do you reach the threshold? I mean, first of all, it started off as misconduct in public office.
And of course, so we'll get to that. So we just get to, and that's my fault. When we complained, we were all very clear because he'd acted in his capacity as leader of Oldham Council, and we have the highest civil servants in the country who he reached out to in his capacity as leader of the Oldham Council, trying to get people sacked.
Yeah.
That is in his capacity, his formal capacity, as it is in his public office. He
Yes,
acted in his public office.
absolutely.
So his behaviour was
councillor.
misconduct.
Yeah, because not just councillor for Failsworth West, leader of Oldham Council. Both his public titles were on that email.
And I've released those emails in the past, leader of Oldham Council. And when he phoned people up and emailed them, chasing them up, he tried to bully them into acting by saying, I'm the leader of Oldham Council. He phoned Sarah's employer, didn't he? And said,
That's exactly right.
Do you know who I am?
Have you heard of me? Have you heard of me? My God, yeah. I think everybody's heard of him, but not for very good reasons. I think he's notorious, isn't he? Notoriously bad. Yes,
So-
we have heard of you.
We now find ourselves in a position where victims are scared, and they have every right to be scared because this man is clearly protected. And not just protected, the police do his bidding. They don't just protect him from crimes, they go after people he doesn't like. Look at the way they went after that gentleman you made reference to. Look at the way they've gone after Debbie Cole. You've got to say, yeah, and there are more examples, aren't there?
Examples, yeah. People are not prepared to come forward and state it, but people have told us it's harassment, and simply because he's taken it upon himself to not like you for whatever reason. I'm not always sure of the reasons. I can see why he doesn't like Mark, and Mark's standing against him. He's never liked us since we set up our Failsworth Forum, ever. So, yeah, that feeling went back a long way. I never, ever expected him to do anything so dirty as this. I knew he was capable of dirty tricks. We've been on the end of them many, many times and ignored him. But this is personal and this is outrageous. And I couldn't believe that he would really do this. But he takes it upon himself because he's not fearful, is he? He's not fearful of any repercussions because there will be no repercussions.
And you're right. And do you know why? And I'll share with you why I believe. I'll share with you why I believe why this is. And this is why I'm hesitant to blame the police officer investigating immediately. But I think his career's wrecked. I think this detective inspector is in a real pickle because the people of our town can see what is taking place and what's going on. Now, what's happened here is Sean Fielding has some very, very influential friends. So in addition to being leader of the council, both him and his girlfriend have close associations with Andy Burnham, who's the police and crime commissioner. My understanding is both of them were invited to Andy Burnham's 50th birthday party. We all know Sean Fielding's girlfriend works for Andy Burnham in a job that is way beyond her past experiences. And we also know Sean Fielding heads up a department for Andy Burnham, and Andy Burnham is dependent on Sean Fielding to railroad through his Greater Manchester Spatial Framework version 2, which will build on our green belt. He's also reliant on Sean Fielding to support the incinerator in Royton that will be tall or as tall as the Civic Centre. that will take all the waste from across Greater Manchester and beyond to burn plastics and poison our children. So here you have a you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back relationship with both of them. You've already seen, and this is how you and I met, because you got in touch with me over a year ago now by Messenger off the back of the information I'd released about the grooming gangs. And now we know the truth of all that, Kath. They've even kicked that into touch, the investigation into touch, until after the elections, and they've not given a single reason as to why that investigation has been delayed until the middle of next year. At what point does this not become an accident and we just call it for what it is?
Well, I kind of think it speaks for itself. I honestly believe he will get beaten in May. I just can't see the majority of people being blinded to this. We will go out and do everything we possibly can, because you cannot have a man like this leading our town. He's led it now, is it 3 years? We're in a bigger mess than we've ever been. But I could maybe tolerate all that if you could warm to him, if you could see some depth to him, if he had empathy. But he's a liar. He's a goddamn liar.
He's a barefaced liar. He's a barefaced liar.
He's lied about my husband. He's lied. It's pure and utter lies. And that is what gets everybody hot under the collar. When somebody lies about you and you've got no redress, it really, really rankles. And that's the problem.
Kath, he referred to me as a convicted criminal. Yeah, I'm not a convicted criminal in any way. You know, not in any way am I a convicted criminal. But he had the audacity to lie about me, call me a convicted criminal, and also claim I'm being investigated by the Grooming Gang inquiry. Yeah. He called me a far-right activist. He called one of my oldest friends, Moab. He's the only wage earner in his house. None of us live lavish lifestyles. He's the only wage earner. He's a civil servant. He's the only wage earner in his house. He tried to get him sacked. He called him a far-right agitator. He just made things up. He's a liar. He's a barefaced liar. And now what you've got is the police have refused. They've not failed. I've spoken to this detective inspector. I've spoken to police officers who are a friend of mine. They just look at me. I'm sure your husband has. And they roll their eyes because what's wrong?
Yes. He spent hours on the phone on Friday and Saturday with colleagues who were in the police and former colleagues, all old school coppers who cannot believe it. You look at malicious communications, you read the definition, you read the things that he said about these 4 people, and he is guilty. There is no way around that. And yes, the inspector has been thrown under the bus. He's been hung out to dry because he's been told this can't go any further. This has to be hushed. And this is my opinion. If Sean's listening or listens or his cohorts are out there, don't start pointing your finger at me. This is what I believe and what many other people believe. And so if you're prepared to do that, then you are not fit to govern the town, or you are not fit to be an inspector in the police. Let's find a policeman who's got balls. Let's find a policeman who's got balls and says, no, I'm not doing that. This is the way it's done. I joined the police force to safeguard people, and that's what I will do. Sometimes it's very lonely standing up for the truth if you're on your own, but it's the right thing to do, and we don't have enough right-minded people leading our town. Not by a long way do we have right-minded people.
Kath, these are just
that everybody knew.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Sorry.
No. Kath, of course you're cross, and you have every right to be cross. He's tried to ruin your husband. He tried. I mean, I get the thing with your husband, even though I disagree with it, like I get it with me. You know, I've opened my mouth against him. I'm a critic of his, okay? So he's come after me and lied. I get that your husband's standing against him, so he's lied. But your daughter, Kath, come on. Your daughter, who works in a school, who had nothing to do with any of this.
No, it's absolutely appalling. I mean, she's worked hard. They're a young couple with 2 young children. Why did he want to harm my daughter? Why? Can anybody make any sense of that? What kind of person is he? And then he goes out on Thursday and Friday and gives interviews. And all right, he's giving interviews and he's made an absolute fool of himself because he did us a great favour in saying...
Well, we didn't know, did we?
Interviewed.
We didn't know, did we? The police wouldn't tell us whether they'd interviewed him.
Yeah. No, the police wouldn't answer the question, so he answered it for us. Because that's what he's like. His ego is so big. But he made himself sound like the victim. He doesn't care about possibly the lives he's destroyed of these 4 people and their partners, etc. And the life of this inspector, because he's the one with his back to the wall now, because I honestly can't see how GMP will get out of this. I cannot see it.
Well, how can you have...
Because there'll be more back covering, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's there for all to see. It's in black and white. It's not hearsay. It's not I said, he said. It's there in black and white. I'm quite prepared, as I know Mark will be, once we've sorted things out, to put the whole damn thing online. I think it's about... How many pages is it, Mark? It's about 13 pages long.
Kath, and I've seen it. I've seen yours, I've seen Jane's. Yeah.
No, I'm not.
No. I've seen yours, I've seen Jane's, I've seen Mohib's, or some of Mohib's, and it's not just shocking. He's then gone back and hounded them. It's not like he's just complained and made something up. He's gone back to them and hounded them. Yeah.
Yeah, he made a phone call to say, well, I think he made 2 phone calls to Sarah's boss. He made 2 phone calls to Mark's boss that I know of. When he didn't get the satisfaction that he wanted, when he didn't get the results he wanted, you know, and then he added to his original complaint. He made 13 complaints and then he added another 3. So when Mark was finally interviewed by his boss, the deputy director of the CRC, no less, they took it very, very seriously.
But Kath, just pause. Pause. This is why it's misconduct in public office. They took it very seriously. When the leader of Oldham Council contacts you in his official capacity as the leader of Oldham Council and presses on you that one of your employees is linked to child molesters, criminals and far-right activists, come on. I'd take it seriously if one of my employees and someone in a position like that got in touch. That is why it's malicious communication. Not just malicious, that's why it's misconduct. I it's why it's misconduct in public office.
I totally agree with you, 100%. And I also think to have delved into people's private lives, people, some of whom we never knew before we set up the party. Some people had joined the party. He took our official photograph, he named every single person and sent it to Mark's boss. What that had to do with anything, I don't know. He named every person on that photograph and he spoke about people that were present at the meeting. And he named people who live in Failsworth's community as far-right supporters, Tommy Robinson supporters, criminals, and he named them. And yet when we complained to Oldham Council that he'd named these people, which we didn't know about these things, which may or may not be true, they said he'd done nothing wrong.
Well, we know the council. We know, I call him Paul Bentwhistle. You know, the borough solicitor oversees all of this, and I genuinely think he's bent. There's no other way in which this council has been able to get away with what it has for as long as it has. Now, my issue, it continues, Kath. My issue continues because after this, he's had the cheek, so brazen. He's come out and said, we've wasted police time and we should be arrested.
My God. Oh my God. He said that's a criminal offence within itself, wasting police time. So when this person, who I can't name, a member of my family, was arrested and taken into the police station, and a barrister was brought from Rochdale to represent him. I wonder how much that cost. Was that not wasting police time? Is that okay for him to waste police time? Have all those police officers outside his house in case Debbie turned up in a bother boots? You know, let's have it right. Let's have it right. It's one rule for him, one rule for everybody else, and it's time Oldham woke up and opened their eyes.
It's a disgrace.
If we don't do something about it now, we're going to live like this for many years to come. He'll get another 4 years.
Kath,
And then,
the town...
And that be the I'm moving away. I'm not putting up with him any longer.
Kath, the town is at a crossroads. It is it finds itself at a place where if we don't come together and move forward to dispose and replace and take on these tyrants and name them for what they are and deal with all of the consequences that come to us regardless, if we don't stand up for the town now, this town is finished. This town is finished for good.
Really is. It really, really is. And I've got to say to you, at 63 years of age, we're both 63, I could be sat with my slippers on, drinking hot chocolate all day. I don't have to do this. I've got no point to prove. Mark has no point to prove. We did it and we do it because we care. We care about the place. We care about Failsworth so much. And what goes on is corrupt. And it's time that people took control of their own town and their own finances and made them answerable, because there's no hope otherwise. There's no hope.
No, it's true. I mean, really, I know she won't take it the wrong way. I had an exchange with Rocky before I came on. I just posted in response to her about the police, and if I knew this beforehand, why did I go down this road? Kath, none of us knew this beforehand. Did any of us think the police would behave in this way?
Oh my God!
Your husband's a policeman, a retired policeman.
No, you kind of think that might happen, but you really want to be proved wrong. You really want to be proved wrong. You want to believe in our police. You want to believe in the justice system. We all do, you know. And for Mark, 32 years a copper, to see it like this is really, really upsetting. Of course it's upsetting. And his pals who were all coppers with him. And, you know, they're like a band of brothers and they talk to each other regularly and none of them can believe it. But it's the truth. And trying to run the police as a politician will never be fair, will it? How could it ever be fair? If you know.
Well, this is what the issue is. This is the crux of the issue. The man in charge of the police isn't a policeman. The man in charge of the police is Andy Burnham, the Labour Party mayor, who is Sean Fielding's friend, who gave Sean Fielding's girlfriend a job, and who is reliant on Sean Fielding to pass through some big schemes that many of us in our town object to, which includes the building on our green belt, and which includes our objection to an incinerator being built in our town.
I know. You know, you just feel lost for words sometimes. But you've got to pick yourself up. You've got to dust yourself down and say, we will carry on. We will carry on. The good people that are on this site tonight, we will all carry on. It's a fight. And he actually insulted me for referring to it as a fight and said I was making veiled threats. There are no veiled threats. Fight doesn't necessarily mean punch somebody in the face. There are other ways of fighting. And that is exactly what the people of Oldham need to do. We need to fight back.
And Kath, ordinarily...
May, but people need to vote.
Of course they do. Ordinarily what would happen in this situation is you'd get in touch with your MP and they'd make representation on your behalf. Your MP is his mate. He was the agent of Angela Rayner. So Sean Fielding was Angela Rayner's agent. The other MP in Oldham is Jim McMahon, who was a Failsworth councillor, who put Sean Fielding where he is as leader of the council.
Yeah, correct.
He's protected on all sides, and the only chance we have is to vote him out.
Got to do. And Failsworth people have got this in their hands, and they need to hear it. A lot of them don't want to hear it. They don't want to believe it, because he's lived in Failsworth all his life. His father's lived here 50 odd years, 60 odd years, I'm sorry. The family are well known. The grandma was an absolutely lovely lady. She worked in the local shop. So they've got a history. But so bloody what? Nobody cares. Don't care about the history. Care about what's happening now. History's history. Let's move forward. You can't stay still for long. You have to move forward. I've got grandchildren. Do I want them to grow up in this Oldham? No, I do not. No, I do not. It's corrupt. No. There's no fairness. There's no honesty. And it's time for change. Whoever's out there listening to me now, and I know I'm ranting.
No, you're not. You're not. I wanted you on.
Vote independent.
No, and I wanted you on, Kath, because they have been trying to divide us for so long. I still, I go and visit my mum, even with COVID. I sit outside. I don't go in her house. I'll go with a brew and I'll sit on a, on a wall. I'll sit on the car, and I'll chat to her from her doorstep. She's dying, and we chat. And whilst we're chatting, the odd Asian lad will walk past that I've known since we were young. And in this 1 year, I've had one row with one idiot. One row with one idiot who tried to have a row with me. And I gave him what for, and then he apologized and left. Because in the end, I said to him, are you really having this row with me in front of my mother who fed you when you were a child? Is that really, you're having this row with me? You've got my phone number. Why don't you phone me if you wanted to talk to me? But the majority of people, Kath, the majority of people absolutely hate, and these are the Asian people, they absolutely hate what's gone on. They hate the cartels. They hate the Labour Party. They hate the way in how they've been demonised for somehow being responsible for the grooming gangs, when it's the Labour Party politicians and the council officers who fail to prosecute them. They don't want to see these kids raped or groomed any more than anyone else does. And what we've got in this town, unfortunately, Kath, is Sean Fielding desperately pushing this narrative that somehow you, me, we're all far-right activists and we're linked to far-right activists. And the majority of the town see through it. They see through this.
But each and every person that he claimed that about, which was all four, were all exonerated. They were all exonerated. The only thing he had on Mark was that he referred to Mark as a bully because somebody had written on, which is fails with matters for those who don't know, that had made a joke about Peter Davis's weight, and it was immediately taken down by the moderator. And then in the December, shortly after this happened, we met Peter out and about and we apologised, and he shook our hands and said no problem. So why was that raised again in the complaint on the 26th
and
of
what's
July?
it got to do with him? What's it got to do with him?
So Mark's boss asked Mark to deal with it and send an apology. He did that.
But none of the far right stuff stood any water, none of that held any weight, did it?
None of them. Far right. Can you? So you can just call anybody what you want, and if he's not dealt with this, and the police haven't dealt with him in the council, then any one person that crosses in could face what these four people have faced, because in the signs that he can't cross. He can say what he wants about anybody, and that's why we cannot allow this. We cannot allow this to carry on and make a point. Even though, like I've just said, I do believe that most people in the town know him for what he is. But I think these four people would just like, because he's gone out and said what he said on Thursday and Friday, I think he's made it worse for these four people. And so they just want to try.
He's made it worse for the police, because the police were trying to fudge answering a simple question, which is, did you interview Sean Fielding? And they tried to fudge that. And Sean Fielding, in his arrogance, has come out to Wilby and Jay Beecher and said, oh, I wasn't interviewed. That doesn't prove your innocence, mate. It just proves something else entirely.
Well, his words were it was tit for tat. Is that not the most ridiculous?
No, it's worse. It's worse, Kath.
Tit for tat.
Tit for tat means...
That's an admission.
He's admitted it. Tit for tat means he's admitted it. He's admitted it.
How can it be tit for tat? I don't understand. I don't understand where he's coming from. He wrote to their employers, and these people tried to defend their honour. How's that tit for tat? No.
And I know I looked at some of these people. So Mark stood against him, but Mark hasn't. None of you guys have joined me in my, in my position really. You've supported me, but you've not gone after him the way I've gone after him, in the way I've gone after him. Moyab hasn't. Jane hasn't. Jane had never met before. The worst Jane had done was she was involved in the campaign to stop the building on Knowles Valley.
That's right. That's
why can't and so what's wrong with that? As someone who lives, who objects to the building on Greenbelt, what's wrong with that? Sarah had done nothing.
There's nothing wrong with
Pete Jackson.
Nobody's done anything.
Pete Jackson. He claimed Pete Jackson had been sacked or had been dismissed from the police force.
Yeah,
he was just fabricated it. He just fabricated it.
It's completely wrong. It's a lie. It's a lie. We've spoken to the man. Mark knows it. It's a lie.
He's a good copper. He retired a great copper.
People. God, honestly. Woo! So, anyway, I better shut up now and let you
Thank you. Thanks, Kath. I appreciate you. So I say to everyone, and there's no, Kath. Let me just say something whilst you're there. And I'm not, I'm not flattering you at all. I speak to so many people. Who are on the side on my comments, and whilst people are brave to a point and have stories to tell, most won't come and say it because they're scared. And you've been brave. You've been brave, and I understand the fear.
I don't think I'm brave at all. I just think it's got to be said. And if I've said anything wrong and it gets passed to him, well, you're all witnesses. How many witnesses? 50-odd witnesses. I have said nothing wrong. I have never said anything wrong. I'm not that kind of person. But there's a chance I might do in the future. Let's just put it there.
Thank you.
Behave myself now. Okay, everybody. Thank you for listening to me.
Good night. And we'll have Mark on at some point on his terms to talk about the things that are important to Failsworth. We're not going to have Mark on for anything else. We're going to have him to talk about the things that are important to you guys.
That'd be lovely.
Okay.
That'd be lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Take care. Good night.
Bye.
Wow. There you go. And let me just put this up because I think it's really important. David, have the people who he phoned, so have the people who Sean Fielding phoned had statements taken from them, the head teachers, etc. No, this is my point, David. These are the witnesses. These are the victims' witnesses. Even the victims' witnesses were not contacted. Let that sink in. Sean Fielding was not interviewed. No one at the council was interviewed. The victims' witnesses were not interviewed, and the file was not presented to the CPS. Furthermore, the victims themselves had to badger the police to give their witness statements, and many of them had their statements cancelled, their interviews cancelled multiple times. So where was the investigation? What was the investigation? You've got to ask. Paul, we did not make a single false allegation against Sean Fielding. Because if we'd made a single false allegation against Sean Fielding, and I'll say it now, Sean Fielding, why are you not releasing a statement on the child abuse at Failsworth School? The child abuse that was covered up at Failsworth School. The child abuse in a school where you were governor. We're not making anything up. These guys think they are above the law and they can do what they want. And unfortunately, in a cartel-controlled town, in a broken town, in a town that the Audit Commission described as ungovernable, we are finding out that this is exactly what this town is, ungovernable. It's a mobster, gangster-led town. Steve, and I'm looking at Gary Tarbuck because I know his wife's a copper. I've got friends of mine who are coppers, Steve. They're embarrassed. They have nothing to say. They're just embarrassed. And the problem is, Steve, for Greater Manchester Police, Sean Fielding, Andy Burnham and all the others, is we're not like those 12-year-old girls who were groomed and gang raped, who went crying to the police and they just told them to go away, or even tried to claim they'd done something wrong. We are professional, we are articulate, we are resolute. We know the difference between right and wrong, and we're willing to stand up not just for ourselves and each other, but for everyone else in the town. And we're not going to go away as easily. The police failed these victims. And the question now, it's not really a question, is it? We know why the police failed these victims. And in the background, what's took place from when they complained to this judgment, this decision coming out, is Greater Manchester Police have been placed in special measures for this very thing, failing victims. How can you not have interviewed Sean Fielding? Greater Manchester Police. So many victims, respectable, legitimate victims, with a paper trail, not he said, she said. And you refused to interview Sean Fielding. And then when victims asked, you didn't even tell them whether he'd been interviewed or not. We wouldn't have known if it hadn't been for Sean Fielding that he'd not been interviewed. We know the witnesses, the employers haven't been interviewed because these people work for these employers. No. Disgraceful. If there's a line in the sand, if there's a line that we've crossed, this is it. You're done. Fielding is done. Democracy in this town as we know it is done. There is no one who is going to look at this case and come to any other conclusion. That's the thing, Mark. We're not going away. We'll work through every avenue available to us. And we'll force a reckoning. You can't do this. You can't abuse power in this way. Is that a question, Victor? Did Andy Burnham interview the police officer or interview him and told the police there was no evidence to go on? Did Andy Burnham interfere? Is what you're asking, isn't it, Victor? My fear is that Andy Burnham did interfere. My fear is that Burnham took care of his mate. And in return, his mate will take care of Burnham's policies in Oldham. Sean Fielding, in his official capacity as leader of Oldham Council, in June, July, August last year, began writing to the employers of a number of individuals he'd targeted. He wanted them silenced. So he found out who their employers were. He wrote to them with a series of malicious and fabricated claims. The consequence of this was that they were investigated extensively. To make sure that the investigation went his way, Sean Fielding followed up these complaints with repeated phone calls and emails, making sure that these employers knew who he was and what he felt had gone on. The allegations included that these people were far-right activists or they were connected to convicted criminals and were bringing their employer into disrepute. He wanted these individuals done for something known as gross misconduct, which would mean instant dismissal. There were Mark Wilkinson, Moya Buddin, Jane Barker, and Sarah, your surname escapes me, Ramsbottom? I want to say, I'm not sure that's right. I also am aware that there were other employers that we suspect he wrote to and people were sacked. So the benefit these four had was that they worked effectively in the public sector where they were due where they were entitled to due recourse and investigation and some form of legitimate process. We know in many private sector organisations this wouldn't happen and people just get sacked. Sarah Radcliffe. Thank you. So I suspect there are other people who I've spoken to, some of you are here, who have lost your jobs as a consequence of Sean Fielding's complaints. And your employer just didn't want to hassle and just got rid of you. Within his complaints, he made reference to a number of individuals and lied about them as well. They included Debbie Cole, Paul Eric, Pete Jackson, who is a retired with honours police officer, and myself. There are also others he referenced as part of far-right activists and all sorts of other nonsense. When the victims found out, to these individuals here, once they found out they were part of a coordinated campaign via Sean Fielding, and that was via our platform, they each reported it to the police because the allegations were lies. The police initially tried to fob them off and then agreed to take victim statements. The victim statements took considerable time, and each of the victims had to go back to the police asking when their interviews would be taken. Once the interviews were finally taken, some of them had not heard anything for 3 months before receiving an email to saying the threshold had not been met to prosecute. Debbie Cole received an email addressed to someone else. Sarah Radcliffe didn't receive an email at all. Her father was told to pass on the message. The victims immediately began to exchange emails with the police asking for clarity on how it was that the threshold was not met. There were 4 very simple questions involved. Sean Fielding, was he interviewed? Yes or no? From the correspondence I've seen, the police avoided answering that question. Thankfully, we now know from Sean Fielding's own mouth that he was not interviewed. That's right. 4 people who don't know each other, or 3 of them definitely don't know each other, report a crime, and the person they report the crime against is not interviewed. Just let that sink in. They didn't interview him. But they investigated for 3 months, 4 months even. So what did they investigate? Was OMBC interviewed? So was the Chief Executive of Oldham Council interviewed? We know that a number of these victims also complained to the council, and we know Sean Fielding is currently being investigated by the council. He's not managed to get rid of all the complaints. So if the council see fit to investigate him, would you not have done that as a police officer? Gone to his employer where he acted in the official capacity? If for no other reason than to identify other victims? Because other victims may have been sacked, or there may be other victims we don't know about. Surely you go and check his phone records and his email records because he used his official email account as leader of the council to add weight to these fabricated allegations. No. So no one at OMBC was interviewed. Sean Fielding wasn't interviewed. And we know that the employers, senior civil servants, high-level professionals who would confirm what Sean Fielding did, they weren't interviewed. And finally, was the file presented to the CPS? Well, I think we all know the answer to that, don't we? This What Sean Fielding did is misconduct in public office. The severity of misconduct in public office is life imprisonment. There is no doubt it was misconduct in public office. Over 1,200 people signed a petition wanting him arrested, fearing, I believe, that we would end up in this position and an attempted cover-up would take place. Because I don't know what other words there are to describe this. Does anyone else? What other words are there to describe this investigation or non-investigation? Can you imagine, Mark, if I'd done something or you'd done something and there were 4 witnesses and you'd not be interviewed? I keep going. And you saw Kath. Kath gave an example of one of her own family members who seemed to have a disagreement with Sean Fielding in an exchange of words. And 2 CID officers turned up to his door days afterwards and interviewed him under caution. And that was just off the word of Sean Fielding. How does that work? I'll let Marilyn have the last word on this. Yes, Marilyn. It's absolutely diabolical.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.